Ditch the store-bought mixes, because everything's better when you make it from scratch. Hey guys, it's Jara with Wicked Prepared. Welcome to the channel today. Today I've got another meal in a jar. Well, actually, this isn't so much a meal as it is a mix in a jar. Leave me a comment down below and let me know if you're the convenience food box mix kind of person or a person who likes to make things from scratch. Or maybe you're like me and you're a little bit of both, depending on the situation. The beauty of these meals in a jar and mixes in a jar is that you can have both those things in one package. A convenience mix to use later that you made from scratch today. It's the best of both worlds. Today I'm making this beautiful raspberry quick bread as a just add water pantry mix. A few months ago, I saw this post in a group I'm in. Someone posted this delicious looking bread and asked if anyone had a recipe for a bread like this using freeze-dried raspberries. Well, I kept an eye on the post for a few days, but no one ever shared a recipe, so I decided I was gonna make a recipe and do it as a just add water mix. Now, you know me, I love doing things in jars. I love making just add water mixes. To me, those are magic words, just add water. If you look at most of the quick bread mixes that you can buy at the grocery store, they usually require additional ingredients. See, here's a mix that I had in my pantry. This one's seen better days, but you can see here that you have to add egg, milk, and oil. So this convenience mix just became a lot less convenient, especially if you're using your jar meals as part of your preparedness plan like we do. You want to avoid having to add extra ingredients, especially ones that would require opening your refrigerator. So just add water is my mantra. So I came up with this mix and we think it's delicious. Being a bread, of course, this does require baking. So I do like to offer up some alternatives to baking in a traditional electric oven, in case you're using these in an emergency situation when your power is out. If you are able to be outside, a Dutch oven and some charcoal is a great off-grid option for baking. You can even put your loaf pan right inside the Dutch oven. There are also camp ovens that run on propane. We actually have one that doesn't use its own fuel, but it sits over a camp stove burner, so we could use it with our indoor butane burner. And I actually just saw a new emergency oven that can be used indoors with canned heat. Another thing that sometimes works is pouring the batter into a skillet 1 scoop at a time and cooking it like pancakes. So there are options available for baking if the power's out. So let's get started. I'm going to show you how to put together this mix, and I'm also going to show you a couple of flavor variations as well as a few different options for baking it in different forms. So to start with, we just need our jar. Now today I'm using a wide mouth quart jar. Quart jar is the size that I most typically use. And of course, I'm also going to be using a canning funnel, and this is going to just help get everything in the jar easily without making a mess. And other than that, the only supplies that we really need is our measuring cups and spoons and our ingredients. This is really very simple. No special equipment needed. So I'm going to start by adding my raspberries, and we're going to use a cup of raspberries. And of course, you could use any berry you wanted or a combination of different berries. So, a cup of raspberries. I'm going to need to refill this container pretty soon because this is a favorite snack here. Everybody loves the raspberries. Everybody I've ever met who's tried the raspberries loves them. So after the cup of raspberries, the next thing I'm going to put in is the flour. And the flour is going to kind of sift in among the raspberries, and it's going to coat the raspberries. Now, typically, if you're making a bread like this with something stirred into it, that's a good trick, is to coat your stir-in, your mix-in with flour, because it can help suspend it in the batter so that it doesn't all sink to the bottom. But what I find with this recipe, because these berries are dry and they are just light as air, I tend to have the opposite problem. They actually tend to float up to the top of the bread, so it's really not necessary to have the flour on the berries, but it just helps fit more in the jar if we let it filter down. So I'm going to measure out my flour, and I always keep my spoon and my chopstick in here, because when you do your flour, you want to lightly scoop and level, because you don't want to just scoop the flour with your cup, because that's going to pack the flour down, and it can actually make you get more flour than you're actually trying to measure. That's kind of part of the reason people used to sift flour. You don't see many recipes calling for sifting the flour anymore, but I always do my flour this way. So there's 1 cup. We're going to be doing 1.5 cups of flour. So there's 1.5 cups of flour. Next, I'm going to add in my baking powder, and I'm going to do 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder. Now, if you're a regular viewer, you know that I always pass things like baking powder and baking soda. I pass them through a wire mesh strainer like this just because of these little clumps. I don't want to get little clumps that might not dissolve well in the mixture, and then you bite in and get a clump of baking soda or baking powder. So next I'm going to be adding the sugar, and we're going to do 3/4 cup of sugar. So there's 1/2 cup and 1/4 cup. And I did just have a discussion with somebody about the sugar in these jars and the use of oxygen absorbers, because typically if you're sealing up a meal in a jar for a long-term storage, longer than a year usually, you would use an oxygen absorber, or you could use an oxygen absorber to help it last a lot longer. But when we're storing our bulk foods, we know never to use an oxygen absorber with sugar, because it'll turn the sugar rock hard. So it goes to a figure that you probably wouldn't want to use an oxygen absorber in a jar like this. Now, I haven't been doing desserts and sweets and things like that long enough to have actually put any away for long term. We tend to just eat them up pretty quickly. So I'm going to do some experiments with that, because I do think in a jar like this, where it's got a good layer of sugar on it, I do think that could be a problem. But I was wondering if, mixing the sugar in with the other dry ingredients and then adding it to the jar, if that would make a difference with oxygen absorbers. So I'm going to do some experimenting with that and see if I can figure out the best way to do that. But there's other options for storage. You can vacuum seal. I don't think vacuum sealing the jars is quite as good as an oxygen absorber, because it's impossible to vacuum out all of the oxygen, but it is definitely an option, and for something like this I think it would work just fine. So after the sugar, next I'm going to be putting in the scrambled egg powder, and that's going to be 1/4 cup. 1/4 cup of scrambled egg powder. I tell you, this is one of my most used shelf stable items in my kitchen. I love that I can use the shelf stable eggs in jar mixes like this. You can use them in something like a cake mix that needs an egg, anything like that. If you don't have fresh eggs, if the chickens aren't laying, we really like these eggs. If you just scramble them up and cook them, you can't even tell the difference between them and fresh eggs, really. So they're really one of my favorite, most used items. So next I'm going to be adding some butter powder, and I'm going to do 1/3 cup of the butter powder. Next I'm going to add in 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla powder. And this is a great thing to have on hand for if you do a lot of baking mixes in a jar, because it takes the place of your vanilla extract. So next I'm going to be doing 2 tablespoons of instant milk. This is really full. I just opened up a brand new can. I did grab a case of this right now because it's been on sale 60% off. So if you are watching this in the month of July, you still have chance. It's on sale 60% off until July 31st. But I'm going to do 2 tablespoons. 2 tablespoons is the same as 1/8 cup. So if you happen to have 1/8 cup measure, that can save you scooping twice. But not every set comes with 1/8 cup. And then lastly, I'm just going to use 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add my lid. And these mason jars with this type of a lid is going to be very, very airtight. I mean, I have had meals that I put away for over a year without any type of oxygen absorber, no vacuum sealing, nothing, and they were absolutely fine. These lids are very, very airtight. They don't let moisture in, they don't let air in. So here is our beautiful mix, our raspberry bread. And I'm going to go ahead and fix this up right now to show you how this comes out. So mixing this up is going to be pretty simple. I'm just going to use my batter bowl, and we're just going to open up our mix, and I'm just going to empty this jar right into my bowl. And we're going to be adding 1 3/4 cups of water. Now you can measure in your mason jar, because they do have markings on them for measurements. When I'm doing a mix like this, I prefer to measure it in a measuring cup, just because I want my water amount to be a little more precise than if I was doing, say, a pasta dinner or something. But you can add the water into the mason jar just to make sure you've gotten all your ingredients, out, any little remaining bits of powder. And I'm just going to mix this up. Now this is going to seem like a lot of water. It's going to look like it's pretty liquidy, the mixture. But what I found is when I was testing this, the batter looked really, really liquidy. And so I thought, I think I can use less water. So I did. I used less water. And the bread was not as tender, and it was not as, soft, tender, I guess is the word I want. And the flavor was a little bit different, actually, with less water, so. And then I'm going to go ahead and put this into a loaf pan. Now, this is an 8-inch loaf pan. Your typical loaf pans are usually 8-inch or 9-inch, unless you're using mini loaf pans. I have done this in both 8-inch and 9-inch. I like it better in the 8-inch because it's going to fill the pan more and it's going to rise up higher. So you can definitely do it in a 9-inch pan. I've done that as well, and the loaf will just be a little bit flatter. I am going to spray this with nonstick spray. Actually, if you have the kind made for baking that has the flour in with the spray, that's even better. I do have one of those, but it's way in the back of my upper cabinet. I can't reach it, and I don't feel like getting out a stool. So I'm just going to use regular spray. So we're going to go ahead and fill up this pan. All right, so now this is all ready to go in the oven. I'm going to go ahead and put this in the 350-degree oven, and it's probably going to take about 45 minutes. I'm always going to test it and just see when it's ready. For my next variation, we're going to start exactly the same way, and we're going to be adding pretty much all the same ingredients until the very end. We're going to add our raspberries, our flour, baking powder, sugar, scrambled egg powder, and butter powder. For this variation, instead of the vanilla powder, I am going to be adding 2 teaspoons of Thrive Life lemonade powder. Now this is basically just pure lemon juice powder, I guess you would say. This is a lemonade that you would sweeten with whatever you want to sweeten it with. You would add your own sugar, honey, maple syrup, artificial sweetener, whatever you want. So it's mostly just the lemon flavor. So it's a great way to add some lemon to your recipes. I use this even in savory recipes. Like I have my lemon chicken pasta with spring vegetables that uses this, that is really delicious. So 2 teaspoons of the lemonade powder. So this is going to be a lemon raspberry bread mix. Then I'm just going to continue on like we were with my 2 tablespoons of instant milk. And then lastly, I'm just going to use a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Go ahead and get a lid on this one. And there is our lemon raspberry bread mix. Now for the lemon raspberry bread mix, I'm going to be using a muffin pan because you can also make these into muffins. A quart jar of a mix like this is usually perfect size for a dozen muffins. Now I do consider muffins kind of a breakfast because I often will serve muffins for breakfast. Actually, I really could serve any of these breads, muffins, anything like this for breakfast. My kids are always grabbing some of this bread on their way out the door in the morning. So I guess in a way this really can be considered a meal in a jar because I think the muffins and any of the breads could be a breakfast meal for sure. And we're going to mix this up just the same way. I've got my batter bowl. And just like the others, 1 3/4 cups of water. I'm going to put it into my mason jar just to get all the rest of this stuff out of the jar. And then I'm going to get it mixed up. If you're having any issues with clumps, you could also use a whisk for a little bit, especially where the raspberries are broken up more. If this had the whole raspberries in it, you'd have a little bit of a hard time using a whisk, or it would break them up as you whisked. All right, now I'm ready to get this into my muffin pan. I'm going to go ahead and spray these with nonstick spray. And I'm going to use this bigger scoop that I have. This is usually just right for muffins. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get these in the oven, once again at 350, and these are going to take the least amount of time to bake because they're the smallest in volume. One more variation of this raspberry bread, and once again, we're going to start out just the same way. Now, I did use up all the rest of my raspberries, so I'm going to have to open up a new can. Now you probably know that freeze-dried foods have a shelf life of at least 25 years when they're sealed in a can like this. So we just purchase things as they're on sale in our monthly delivery, and then we store them down cellar and we rotate through them just like any other type of food. So this is actually a can that we bought about over 2 years ago. If you do just buy a little bit at a time, a little bit every month, it really adds up. You'd be surprised at how quickly you can build a good stockpile of freeze-dried foods. We basically commit to buying about $100 a month out of our grocery budget worth of freeze-dried foods so that we can get that free shipping. If there's a month with really good sales, we tend to buy more when there's really good sales. But it really has added up quickly by doing that. And there they are. Now I'm not going to dump these into my canister right now because I like to wash those out in between. When I empty it, I like to wash it before I refill it. So I'm just going to leave these in their can for now. You can store them right in the can. I just prefer to take mine out into canisters. It's just an aesthetics thing. It's just my personal preference. But a lot of people store their food right in these cans. Now you can see how these berries on the top are all nice whole berries. It's just when you get down to the bottom of the can that you might find the little powdery bits. Not to mention my things have probably been handled by my kids. They've probably been dropped and tossed around and things like that. So we might tend to have a little bit more crumblage than your typical household would have. So for these really new berries that aren't busted up as much, I am just going to go ahead and crunch them up a little bit. I'm just going to put them in this bag and use the flat side of a meat mallet. I want as little air in here as possible when you're doing this, just so that you don't pop the bag. So this way, these are going to distribute much better throughout the batter, and they're not going to have as much of an issue with rising up to the top. So once again, it's going to be the raspberries, the flour, baking powder, sugar, scrambled egg powder, and butter powder. So everything is the same right up through the butter powder, but at this point, instead of adding vanilla powder or lemonade powder, I am going to add some almond powder. This is an almond flavor powder, so it's just like using almond extract. I absolutely love this stuff. It smells so good. I used to love the almond poppy seed muffins. That was my favorite. So this is, I thought raspberry almond muffins would be really good. So 1 teaspoon of the almond powder extract. And I'll definitely have links to find some of these harder to find items down in my description box as always. And then of course our 2 tablespoons of instant milk and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And there is our almond raspberry bread mix. Now, incidentally, I get all of my little chalkboard labels that I use for these jar meals. The ones I use on my canisters I get from Amazon, but these that I use on my jars, I've been getting from Dollar Tree. They have some really awesome different tags. I mean, these are great for aesthetics. I think they look really good, but I am trying to work on making a printable label for the jar meals that would have a little bit more of the information on it, like the cooking instructions and things. So I am not super good with computers and technical stuff like that. So what I'm really trying to do is sort of get Mr. Wicked prepared to understand my concept so he can do it for me. But hopefully that'll be in the works here coming up pretty soon. But I found all sorts of new different labels at Dollar Tree. They had these for spring, different shapes, flowers, birds. There was a butterfly, these watering cans. I did play around with those a little bit. So there's all sorts of different things to find that's great at Dollar Tree. And next I'm going to bake up the almond raspberry bread, and I'm going to do this one in a bundt pan. This is my favorite way to bake quick breads. This is actually how I usually bake quick breads, banana bread, pumpkin bread, any of those. Because it has the hole in the middle, this is going to bake a lot more quickly, and it really avoids that situation of getting that dark brown thick crust that you sometimes get when you bake in a rectangular loaf pan, because that's going to take the longest to bake. So I'm going to go ahead and mix this one up. I've got my batter bowl again, and I'm just going to go ahead and open this up and get it into the bowl. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and use 1 3/4 cups of water for this mix, and once again I'm going to pour it into this jar just to get out the remaining ingredients. And I'm going to go ahead and get this mixed up. Alright, so I've gone ahead and sprayed my pan, and I'm going to go ahead and get the batter in here. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees. Now you can see what a difference in color there is in the batter when you've actually crushed those berries, because there's going to be a lot more of the powder, which is going to mix in almost just like raspberry juice. So I'm going to go ahead and get this into the oven at 350. This should take about, I would say, 35 to 45 minutes. We'll see. All right, here is our bread. It's been out of the oven for a little bit, so it's cooled down enough for me to hold this here. And I think it's time for me to get it out onto a rack so that it can cool all the way. I'm going to let this cool all the way before we slice into it. And our muffins finished in just over 15 minutes. It was just about probably 16 minutes and these tested done. I am just going to really lightly kind of tilt them in their cups until they cool a little bit, and then I'll get them out onto the rack. Okay, so it was just about 38 minutes for the bundt loaf. I'm just going to cool this for a few minutes here on this rack, and then I'm going to invert it and get it out of the pan. Okay, so I'm just going to take this bread and just turn the rack right upside down on top of it and flip the whole thing. And there is our beautiful raspberry bundt loaf. And I'm going to let this cool before I try to slice into it, or it's probably going to fall apart. And here are all of our breads. You can really see a difference between the ones where I powdered up the raspberries and the ones where I just left them the way that they were, because there just wasn't as much extra powder to color the batter. Okay guys, there you go. 3 different variations of this delicious raspberry quick bread. I hope you all like it as much as my family does. If you try it and you like it, you could go ahead and mix up a half a dozen jars of this or even more to stock your shelves. Once you have all your ingredients lined up, it's almost as quick and easy to make a whole bunch as it is to make one. These also make wonderful gifts or additions to a gift basket. People love getting gifts in jars. And it's a really great feeling knowing that you know everything that went into this jar. There won't be a bunch of chemicals and preservatives and things that you can't pronounce. If it's in the jar, you put it there. Okay guys, if you made it all the way to the end of the video, leave me a raspberry emoji down in the comments. And check out this video next for another recipe you might enjoy. I'm Jara with Wicked Prepared. Survive today, thrive tomorrow. We'll see you next time.